Greetings, everyone, to all my followers of darkness, shadow scavengers, and villainy aficionados. Welcome, bienvenue to one of my good old-fashioned villains review episodes. I'm your host, as always, Lord of Shadows, present with you guys, and here we are. We've reached the end of our shadow journey, the end of an era. We have reached officially Villains Review Season 2 finale. Now, just because we are at the end of Villains Review Season 2, it doesn't mean this is where the story ends. It doesn't mean you're going to have to wait 7 or 8 years for this villain's review to return. No. That's not the case here. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's just stick to the main plot, shall we? Today, I'm going to review a villain that I wanted to review for a very, very long time. He is one of the reasons why I love this video game franchise, and he's also one of my top 5 favorite villains of all time, period. So without further ado, I'm giving you guys the one, the only Entropy. Yep, from the Crash Bandicoot franchise, or as fully known as Dr. Nefarious Tropy, master of time and the creator of the very time twister machine you see before you. Now you're on my time, you little skunk. Give me the crystals. Ooh, man, every time when I hear those lines, it just simply gives me a smile on my face. Through and through. Even when I'm playing the game, or when I'm watching a YouTube scene, or even a cutscene. Every time. But now, let's just start with this once and for all, shall we? So, we start with the first part of the subject, which of course is, as I like to call it, This is Your Evil Life. Basically, to kind of give you a little background about Entropy, he was first introduced in Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped, or, as I like to say, Crash Bandicoot Warped, basically. As now, some people might say is one of those like secondary villains. Personally, I will put him as like one of the main villains of the plot of Crash Bandicoot 3 to basically assist Dr. Neocortex and Uka Uka, not simply to steal the crystals or the gems or the time relics, but also to destroy Crash Bandicoot once and for all. And of course, alongside Cortex, he was defeated and basically turned into a little baby and basically trapped somewhere in time with Uka Uka. And ever since that game, he appeared in multiple different games, all the way to Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time, where it basically made me fell in love with the character even more. Oh yeah. Now, before I go into any single detail, I just want to say a lot of people were, the ones who are familiar with Crash Bandicoot, of course, usually tell me that Entropy is like one of the henchmen of Dr. Neocortex, just like Nitrous Brio or Engine were, or Tiny or Dingo Dial or Ripperoo and so on and so forth. And I was like, well, it might look like that, especially when you see him like in Crash Bandicoot, like the Wrath of Cortex, where basically he had a seat on the table alongside Tiny, Dingo Dial, Engine, and Cortex when Uka Uka was basically bashing them of how much of a big of a failure they are and everything. So you kind of in that particular scene at all, and also kind of like the whole idea of in Crash to Insanity, where you kind of thought like Entropy was kind of like working for Cortex as well, until you heard of the amazing treasure of the evil twins, and basically kind of like decided to stab him in the back and go basically on a treasure hunt and everything. I mean, okay, I kind of got the idea why people might think as he was like one of Cortex's henchmen, but honestly, for me, I never saw him as a henchman. I will probably see him more as a partner in crime. Basically, I think like when Uka Uka introduced him in Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped, I think like he introduced him as sort of like an ally to kind of like to assist, like I said, to kind of like help Cortex and Uka Uka destroy Crash Bandicoot and everything, and steal like crystals all over the timeline and everything. So I kind of always saw him as kind of sort of like a partner in crime and everything. Now, the first time I saw Entropy, I fell in love with his design. Not simply with this like big ass clock and everything, but the overall everything, like from the face, from the machinery he has on his chest, the hat, the fork, as a weapon and everything. And also, I'm a big sucker for mad scientists. Okay, I just want to say that. Like, I'm a big sucker when it comes to mad scientists. But before Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time, I always kind of thought of him as more like an egotistical villain. But after Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time, I'm gonna go as far as like categorizing Entropy as a cataclysmic villain. Because especially after everything he did in Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time, he literally deserves that type of villainy when it comes to title and everything. He really, really does. I mean, Entropy, out of all the villains, I mean, sure, Dr. Neocortex, he's the arch enemy of Crash Bandicoot, but if I have to personally choose, I will go with Entropy being I would rather choose Entropy as the overall arch enemy of Crash Bandicoot. I mean, of course, like I said, like Sonic had, like Dr. Eggman had Sonic, Wily had Mega Man, Cortex had Crash Bandicoot. But if I have to personally choose, I'm gonna go with Entropy as the overall arch enemy of Crash Bandicoot, because out of all the mad scientists, when it comes to villains, I would say he is the one who actually did more damage than the rest of them. Now, of course, and I know that some people might say, how can you say this about Cortex? He did a lot of damage. Sure. But Entropy, for me, he was like the only member of the N team who I always thought to be way more intimidating as a villain, than Cortex. And throughout Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time, he actually proved that to be not simply more diabolical, but also way more evil, way more intimidating, and way more threatening. Especially with his like entire knowledge of not simply chronokinesis or time travel, but just simply time and space in general. Out of all the villains there, I would say Entropy is one of the most dangerous ones. Abso-freaking-lutely. Oh yeah. I mean, when you see him as a character, you kind of think oh, he's very cartoonish, very classic, very old traditional, especially the way how he thinks of himself, being on top of everyone else, having, like I said, having a big gigantic, having a big overinflated ego when it comes to about himself and everything, just simply he sees himself on top of his N team fellow members, but also at the same time. By the way, the N team is not an official title when it comes to the Crash Bandicoot franchise. It's something that I used to call all the mad scientists in Crash Bandicoot. So basically, out of the entire N team, basically, he always saw himself on top of everyone else. Everyone else, when it comes to his genius, his stature, his abilities and everything, he, or even as a villain in general, he always saw himself on top of everyone else, but also not just simply that, throughout, because like I said, throughout the different games, he really proved himself to be a very formidable villain, 100%, everyone, 100%. I mean, the guy, I mean, like I said, besides that, also, I will admit he has some skills when it comes to combat and everything, but again, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But so far as a villain, he, like I said, he is one of those classic, cartoonish kind of villains and everything, especially when it comes to his overall villain goal and all. But I still there's something about it. There's sort of an aura about him that really made me feel intrigued about this character. Like I said, from his personality, from his knowledge, from his weapon, and also how much of a damage he did in the Crash Bandicoot universe and everything, and also, I mean, he's one of those villains that can easily stab anyone in the back. Not simply, I mean, he did it to Cortex twice, in Crash to Insanity when he went to a little treasure hunt, and not to mention Crash Bandicoot 4 Is About Time, where basically he discovered that the Cortex was basically a pussy, in comparison to him. So and he was oh well, you don't want to work with me. Well, that's very fortunate. Well, I found a new partner, and also I found a new plan. He's one of those villains that he basically could easily scheme behind either their bosses or their partner's back. I mean, that's the villain's life for you. When you have partners in crime, or allies or henchmen, usually you're always going to have some of them who are going to be ready to stab each other in the back. You know, basically one of the main rules of villain I always had is to never trust another villain. The only one who you can depend on is, of course, yourself. And that's literally what entropy is. Like, he literally will betray anyone because the only one he cares about is himself, and his overall achievements, basically. But overall, I always liked entropy. Like, there's so many elements about his character I really, really enjoyed. Absolutely. Now the only thing that was never explored when it comes to like his character, that was the villain's origin story, or should I say his origin story. That was never explored. Now there was a story going around that one of the reasons why he's blue is that because of like how much he traveled, basically his skin has turned blue. Now that I think like it was never officially acclaimed that actually happened to him and everything. I could be wrong. I don't know. But that's the only part of the origin story that we know. We don't know anything about him when it comes to like when it comes to like his when he was a child, or how he became a villain, how he gathered the knowledge of time, or how he became obsessed with time and everything. Like there's literally nothing about him when it comes to his past. There's nothing about him that kind of makes me that could be used to basically explore his villainy even more. I mean, whenever I would talk about entropy, I always kind of use my imagination to kind of like kind of assume what kind of a life he had before he became a villain and everything. But I think like just like Cortex was when he was a little boy in the evil academy of Madame Amberley. I think like that's what entropy was as well. I think like he was evil ever since he was a kid. I think that's one of the most reasonable theories. That's why I think that's one of the most reasonable theories I could imagine. That they could have actually been true. But everything else, yeah, it's a mystery. It's an absolute mystery when it comes to like his background and everything. Because that's kind of a darn shame because I really wanted to know like how like what was the reason they gave an obsession for time or to time travel, or even to control time. Like I always kind of imagine I was trying to imagine what was the reason behind it. That was always kind of like one of my fascinating things about entropy. So besides his skin turning blue every time he time travels, everything else about entropy's background has been a mystery, absolute mystery. But like I said, I think like just like Cortex, he was evil from the very beginning, since being a very classic, cartoonish kind of like villain and everything. I think that that's exactly what it was. Now, when it comes to like strengths and weaknesses, now of course when it comes to like mad scientist, usually is up there. But one of the things I first want to say is that the entropy does have some skills when it comes to like hand-to-hand combat, or at least like using certain weapons, like for example the I was gonna forget like what's it called and everything, but the overall fork basically that he's holding and everything, like I would the way how he used a few times in combat, I will kind of give him credit that he does have some combat skills, for sure. So, and that's one of the things I do appreciate, because like I said, usually when you have mad scientists, usually we have different machines or gadgets or robots to kind of like do their own bidding and everything. But when it comes to entropy, like he's one of those types of villains that basically could take matters in his own hands, and face the hero face to face and everything, which of course what he did in the boss fight in Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped for It's About Time, and of course Crash Twin Sanity as well. And also for other levels in Breath of Cortex. Not to forget to mention that. So yeah, I will definitely say like just like all the other mad scientists, in the Crash Bandicoot franchise, he's one of those villains that could take the matters in his own hands and stand up against the hero and everything, which is very, very impressive, especially when it comes to mad scientists, because usually they would ask others to do their bidding, but not for Entropy, not for him. So, and that's like very impressive. Now, when it comes to his overall other strengths, like I said, when it comes to scientists, it's all in the mind. Okay, it's all in the mind. So like his skills, like it goes all the way from like extraordinary extraordinary knowledge, or basically a big genius level intellect, to, like I said, being very intimidating, as a villain as well. Chronokinesis, which basically means slowing or slowing down time, or making it go faster. Basically, the overall knowledge of time and space, and of course teleportation. Which of course we have seen, especially in Crash Bandicoot 3, warped. And also one of the other skills I always kind of find impressive is the way how he fucking create those like time ghosts of himself. Or as I would like to basically use Flash's term, speed mirage, basically. Like the overall time ghost that Entropy uses in fucking like the Crash Bandicoot racing games, they're literally kind of like speed mirages, basically. And boy, do I hate these buggers. Do I hate them. Anyhow. So basically, like I said, when it comes to his overall strengths, like like I said, when it comes to like I always kind of describe it. Every single scientist, when it comes to like in this case, mad scientists in villainy, every single scientist has their own profession. When it comes to like robotics, when it comes to genetics, when it comes to like mutations, when it comes to like in this case, the knowledge of time and space, creating time machines and everything. Like every single mad scientist, they have their own, let's just say, territory of profession, basically, or type of like mad scientist profession. When it comes to like Entropy, his is time and space, or overall, or just simply time travel in general. That's basically his overall line of expertise when it comes to like being a mad scientist and everything. And I have to say, like the overall knowledge he has and everything, it's very impressive. It's very impressive. Like I said, there's not too many villains basically who are time travel centric, basically. Not just simply like in video games, but like in almost every single part of the fiction in general. But Entropy, I'll definitely think like I always kind of thought of him as like one of the best ones, for sure. I mean the way how he was able to accomplish, like from the like I said, from the time twister machine to like from Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped, from like the machine that he created in Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time, the way how he was able to manipulate not simply time travel, but also like the multiverse as well. I mean, it's very impressive. It is very impressive how much of a big of a knowledge that Entropy possessed and everything. Like so that's like for me a big plus when it comes to like his overall villainy. Now, I will say this. When it comes to like weaknesses, now usually mad scientists, like almost every other type of supervillains, among them, of course, are underestimating your heroes. Basically, that's one of the biggest weaknesses that or should I say traditional weaknesses, the most traditional weaknesses that supervillains have. But besides that, when it comes to Entropy, the overall weaknesses that he possesses, it's all about his demeanor, it's all about his character, it's all about his personality. Like I mentioned before, like he is one of those scientists who sees himself on top of everyone else, that he is one of a kind, that no one can match him, that everyone is beneath him, not just simply other fellow scientists, but like even like characters like Crash Bandicoot. He always saw himself basically at the top of a pyramid. He always saw himself like, the best of the best, like, the number one greatest scientist in the world, or even like number one villain in the world. And sometimes I would even go as far as say he has some like, aristocratic mannerisms at times, like the way how he talks, like for example with Cortex, or the way how he was talking to Crash Bandicoot. Like it kind of makes you feel like oh, like that entropy comes from like a long line of noblemen or something. That kind of sees Crash Bandicoot and Cortex and everyone else like peasants. There's all these sort of types of mannerisms that entropy has that also could be considered as a weakness as well. Oh my God! Not to mention his ego. One of the most deadliest weapons that could be used against a villain is their ego, and entropy is full of it. Oh my God! Not to mention he's a big narcissist. I mean, to give you an example, the guy is in love with himself. Like basically, in Crash Bandicoot 4, it's about time when he met his female variant of himself. The way he was flirting with her and everything. It's literally like entropy flirting for him with himself. Seriously, like the way he was like like making faces like her, like to her and everything. It makes it look like he's flattering. He's basically flirting with himself, which kind of also gives you an idea that he really loves himself. That basically means that he's a narcissist, and that's literally what he is. And all those kind of elements that he possesses are one of the reasons that you can call them as weaknesses, because usually not just simply villains' actions, but basically even like their own characteristics could be their downfall. Like I said, from like simple jealousy to like ego to narcissism to seeing yourself above everyone else, no one being worthy of your time or your partnership and everything. Yeah, yeah. I mean, like those are all elements that could be used against them. hmm And I will even go as far as say I almost kind of feel of entropy even being also one of those villains that is like a loner. You know, basically, like I can even see, which also could be considered as a big weakness when it comes to like villains like entropy, and that is that basically I always kind of also saw entropy as someone like who needs them? I only need myself. Which kind of basically makes him a loner. You know, which kind of also goes, or should I say, which kind of also makes the, which also kind of like goes directly into like that he might have some trust issues as well. I mean, there's just a little theory I have, a little guess I have. Not to mention also one of the things I forgot to mention in This Is Your Life, or should I say, This Is Your Evil Life in this case. Entropy, like sometimes he doesn't mind, having some bloodshed, or to be more precise, he is one of those villains that also enjoys, other people's death or violence, because the way how the female version of himself, was talking to him, like in her universe, how he in her universe she killed Crash Bandicoot and Coco, you can see from his face, and even like the way how his clock, like or the small one and then the big one, went all the way to 12 and everything, and his face like delicious, like he's also one of those villains that enjoys a bit of violence. He enjoys a little bit of death, and torture and everything. Like, yeah. I'll also give him that as well. Also, being like one of those classic villains, Entropy is also one of those villains that, sometimes, he could be, I want to say honorable, I would say fair. Like, for example, when he tell the female version of himself, give him a, let him try, give him a sporting chance, like to kind of like, basically, not just simply kind of shows you that, sometimes he can be fair, but also at the same time, he is interested to see, how far the heroes can go, to try to stop them and everything, like, like basically to see what they're truly capable of, which is could be a strength at the same time, but also a weakness, because usually when you have villains like that and they do make a decision like that, some usually it gives them a big bite up their ass, usually, but sometimes it could work, because that way at least they could also study their enemies even way more and more, so maybe they can give them a conclusion of how to defeat them, but mostly it works on their downfall. So yeah, when it comes to like strengths and weaknesses, like I said, the 99% of the weaknesses that the entropy has is literally, like I said, overall his overall persona, his overall characteristics, his overall demeanor, and also of course underestimating your opponents, which is a very very classic, almost a classic weakness that almost every single villain possesses. Now, when it comes to villain's goal, Entropy had a lot of them. Like let's just say, from killing Crash Bandicoot, conquer the world, hunt down the treasure of the evil twins, and of course, conquering the multiverse to become a god. Which was one of the things I forgot to mention that was really kind of impressive, because when it comes to Entropy, like for example, him having this kind of god wannabe persona, which also is like one of the biggest weaknesses also supervillain can have, because that way they can really carry themselves way too much, way over the edge, which also could lead into their downfall, but with the type of entropy the type of villain that Entropy is and everything, it doesn't surprise me. So, like I said, most of the weaknesses are in his character himself. Is the character himself. And when it comes to the villain's goal, like I said, one of the goals that he had was basically old-fashioned and classic, which of course is world domination. Now, the other one, I will say this: I will give him credit that he wanted to conquer the multiverse, become a god, or more precisely, he wanted to erase the multiverse and start all over again. Basically, try to create a multiverse in his own image, and I will give him credit for that. That's a bit imaginative for Entropy, for sure. That is a bit imaginative for him, So I will give him credit for that. But everything else besides, like I said, is very, very old-fashioned. Again, trying to kill the main hero, world domination, also searching for riches. Very old-fashioned, old-fashioned, very classic, very traditional, like villain goals and everything. But sometimes can be effective. But I will give Entropy credit for conquering the multiverse, try to erase it, start from scratch, and also to become a god and everything. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Thanos, basically, from the MCU, when he basically wanted to collect the stones and erase the entire universe and try to build it in his own image and everything. That's the kind of that's what kind of Entropy from Christmas Before It's About Time remind me of and everything. But still, with that kind of goal, like I said, Entropy really proved himself to be a very dangerous foe. Like I said, for me, way more dangerous than Cortex, and way more dangerous than Uka Uka. Even though, however, I couldn't even say that it is one of the weaknesses. But also at the same time, it kind of makes you think maybe Entropy does acknowledge when another villain is way more powerful than him. Like, for example, Entropy does fear a little bit of Uka Uka. Even though in the Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time, when Uka Uka fainted and everything, it kind of makes you think he basically he didn't give a shit about him, he thinks he's useless, weak, and everything. But I think that was just when Uka Uka fainted, I think that was just bullshit talking, because he opened the portal so they can go back to their own world and everything, because because usually that's the kind of thing, when a big villain is out, then you can talk shit about them, but when they're awake, what was I saying again? So that could be so maybe he was bullshitting at the time, I don't know. But one thing for certain, like I said, that also proves that Entropy had trust issues, that he's ready to betray any single villain that he works with, and every single time when he needs to. But overall, here we are, basically coming to the overall ranking of 1 to 10 shadows when it comes to villains reviews episodes. And for Entropy, now the only problem I had, the reason why it's not a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 for me, is because I didn't, first and foremost, I didn't have too much material to kind of study him a little bit more. Like, for example, my biggest problem I had was that we had nothing about his origin story, which I still believe he will make his character a little bit more interesting. But still, with everything I had, I've seen, from his character, from his knowledge, from his schemes, from his like skills and everything. Like he really proved himself to be a great villain. So, but still, for not being a 10 out of 10 for me, that's only the reason because we had no origin story. So I'm gonna give Entropy a 8.5 out of 10. Yep, I think it's a solid rating for someone like Entropy, 100%. Yep, an 8.5 out of 10, and I'm still holding that rating. And with that being said, guys, yeah, here we are. We have reached the end to one of our another Villains Review episodes. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. And before I go, like I said, yeah, Villains Review Season 2 finale, yeah, this is it, but it's not over. But I'm going to explain that a little bit more in details later on with another video. But with that, here I am done. You guys know the drill. Rate the video, comment, like, subscribe. Give me your personal thoughts and ideas about Entropy. What did you thought of him as a villain? Did you ever play the Crash Bandicoot, game in general? What was your first introduction to the character, in general as well? Everything about Entropy or Crash Bandicoot in general, just put it in the comment section down below. Also, if you're interested to see my previous Villains Review episode about Dr. Neo Cortex, it's going to be in the video description down below. Also, if you're interested to see my Villains Review Season 1 videos or the previous episodes from Villains Review Season 2, they're going to also be in the video description down below. But until then, stay tuned for more, guys. And as always, Lord Shadows signing off. Or, as I like to say, later, fuckers.